You're listening to Idea Collider, a show that explores the world of asymmetric learning. On this show, I will sit down with pharmaceutical experts and business leaders to discuss how to embrace uncertainty and the different learning style that follows. I'm your host, Mike Rea. Let's get into the show.
Hi, Mike.
Hello.
Hi there. How are you?
I'm doing well. How's things?
Good.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm delighted to have you here. Before we kind of get rolling seriously, could you tell us something about you and how you got to, where you are today?
Okay, sure. I started out first half of my career in New York City working for Fortune 100 companies, a major airline that is no longer with us. You may remember Pan Am. I worked for them in the downtown building and management, worked my way up through various management jobs, and then moved from New York City back down to Florida, where I worked for another airline, which is no longer here, Eastern Airlines. I always tell people, everybody I've ever worked for is either out of business or indicted on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, because I also briefly worked for AIG when Greenberg was having problems. But but it was wonderful working the first half of my career that way. You learn a lot in the corporate environment. And so after I decided I don't want to do the corporate thing anymore, I became a consultant and I started working with mid-market companies. And to be honest with you, working in the corporate world, I didn't even know what a mid-market company was. As I got exposed to them, I started asking the CEOs, business owners, a lot of questions and learning from them about what their challenges were. And and then periodically show me their marketing materials, and I'd look at them and I'd ask, well, what's your competitive advantage? What's different? I mean, I've seen this same phrase on all of your competitors' websites and their materials. And I would get these really lame answers, but we have really good customer service and we exceed expectations and we've got good quality. And it's like, okay, come on, get serious. So it was that exposure that got me really looking at this competitive advantage thing. Is we got to stop these businesses from this nonsense, what we affectionately refer to as blah, blah, blah. Nobody's listening. It goes in one ear and out the other when you use cliches. And my phrase is your marketing and sales message of risk of dying of 1,000 cliches? And if you look at a website, I tell business owners when I speak to them now, take your yellow highlighter out, print out the page, several pages of your website, and highlight all the cliches, and then see what's left. And there's very little left. No one is going to wade through that. All of us have ADD. We read too much. We have emails come at us galore. So if you expect your customers to read through that fluff that you won't read through, you're sadly mistaken. So I got to the point where I wanted to help businesses identify what are those things that really may matter to a customer, what are competitive advantages, and how do you go to market with them. But more importantly, it's not just marketing and sales I talk about, it's operations. You can't go out and brag about 98% on-time delivery if your on-time delivery is 55%, right? So you got to be able to back it up.
Yeah, I love the kind of contrast of major corporates and mid markets, because I think we expect the innovation to come from the mid markets, but not always. And certainly, I mean, I'm a positioning guy, and I love that. I always tell people just to squint. Someone shows you a positioning statement, just squint at it. What is it trying to tell you? And is there an idea that pops out of it? And usually it's just words, right? There's words and cliches. And so I love that idea of highlighting all the kind of positioning bingo kind of stuff that you expect to see there. So I kind of love that. But so let's get into your process of unpacking and looking for opportunity.
Yeah, so the first thing we do is we go in, like if we're any kind of company we're working with, we've also done this in Fortune 100 companies. It works across the board. So we go in and we do what we call a Smart Advantage drill down, and we have criteria, what companies should look for. And this is in my book. Whatever you want to say about yourself for positioning should be objective. If you say you have good quality and good people, that's subjective, that's your opinion. It should be quantifiable, not arbitrary. It should not be a cliche, not stated by the competition. And it should also be, this is the one the salespeople hate, it must be true. Salespeople like to say, can it be true-ish? I actually had a group over in the UK sales group who one guy said that to me. I said, no, it means you need the metrics to back it up. You must be able to validate them. And then finally, the last piece is relevant. So we go through this workshop. We have never done a company and got less than 40 or 50 drafted statements that are potential differentiators they didn't know they had. And by the end of the day, the team is going, who knew we were this good? Who knew we got all this stuff? Why aren't we saying this stuff? And we get them to have these, we have a lot of tools we use, but we get them to meet that criteria with their drafted statements. So then we say, okay, this is great. We got 50 statements today, but they're not all relevant. Many of them that you've brainstormed will hit the cutting room floor. We first have to research. We're big proponents of double-blind research. The respondent, meaning your customer and prospect base, don't have a clue who's asking, and you don't get to know what customer A, B, or C said. You get quantifiable data that's projectable to a 90% confidence level, plus or minus 10% error rate. So, okay, so now we've taken all those 50 things, we've distilled them into testable attributes. We go out into the marketplace, we test your industry. They don't know who it is, and we ask them, what's your top buying criteria? So now we know which ones can hit the cutting room floor and which ones we need to work on. So we take the top 3 to 5 top rated values, and we then go back to the company and say, do you measure these things? Let me give you a wonderful example, if I may. We worked for a copy dealers association, and we had a whole group of entrepreneur owners. They were all in the same business, copy dealers. So you're a law firm, you got a copy machine, you don't want it to break down, right? And if it does, you want it fixed. So we went through the research, and number 1 top buying attribute was first time fix. I want to know if I have to call you to come out and fix my copy machine, you're going to do it on the first visit because I don't have time to mess with this. So, all right, we go out. We're actually out in Monterey, California for this big thing with all this association. And we put the finding up on the board. We say, number 1 thing is first time fix. So before I go any further, ladies and gentlemen, owners of your businesses, how many of you measure first time fix? About 1/3 of them raised their hands. I said, all right, at least 1/3 of you do. How many of you are using it in sales and marketing? Not one. And that's classic. We find these things. First time fix, 98%. Well, they started pulling up their metrics and using it and proving it to customers, and their sales shot up through the roof. And it's just, it is simple if you take the steps. It's not hard, but talk to people. First time fix is a heck of a lot more important than when your family started, your grandpa started it, you invest money in the community, all that's warm and fuzzy stuff people like to talk about their business. Doesn't matter. It's not a relevant buying criteria. So we try to steal businesses right into that relevant buying criteria with the research.
Interesting. So I know one of actually the first chapter in your book talks about the fact that, this is why you're in business. So one of the things that would be worth unpacking is who's in charge, right, of what that message is. Is it the people that develop the product? Is it the people that have to sell it? Is there some other mix? It's one of the things we find in the sort of pharmaceutical space is the R&D folks, right? They go, oh, it's good. The product does exactly what we wanted it to, but no one's ever really gone back and said, actually, that's not what anyone's interested in. So do you have a view for, does everyone in a business understand why they're in business?
So that's a great question. And we're presently working with a CRO. So I'm a little bit in that space right now. We can talk later about that. Who decides? When we do our workshop, we ask the company to please have, we cap it at 16 people when we do our internal workshop. Whether it's Zoom or in person, and we want them to all represent different departments. We don't want all R&D in your case. We don't want all operations. We don't want all marketing and sales and senior management. We want a mix because each of those perspectives has something the other guy doesn't have. It's critically important that we have all of those perspectives looking at this exercise, because somebody in IT is going to come up with something about their website, user friendly, but more detail that certainly the marketing person won't know, or the plant manager won't know. So it is rich when you put all those people together, and that's how we get it done. So then the decision, to your question, is whose decision is it? So when we get all that information and we come back with the research and we say these are the top 3 to 5 buying criteria, now Mr. CEO, what are you prepared to do to make sure this is operationally sound? Do you have these metrics today? And 80% of the time they don't. Are you willing to measure those things so we can tout about them? And are you willing to push it down so that your salespeople, and hold them accountable for using this? So we go right back up to the top. You know, we engage everybody, but if the CEO is not behind it, it's not going to happen. And we've had that. We've had it fall on their face because the CEO says, eh.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I love that. And the idea of, I mean, essentially, you know, this value proposition, right, that hasn't typically been investigated by all of the different groups in there. You know, I think, you know, as your second chapter in the book really talks about this kind of idea of competitive advantage. This is how you close deals, right? This is how you make money as an organization. A lot of people think it's a sales activity, you know, so once you've got a good product, just go sell it. You know, you clearly have a very different perspective.
Very much so. And it's so interesting because very often when I have a mixed group and I'll say, what's your company's #1 competitive advantage? Invariably, there's a sales guy who'll go, I'm the company's competitive advantage, because they believe that. And ironically, when we test things in attribute testing, like how important on a 1 to 10 scale is follow up by sales support. And of course, all the salespeople think that's going to come in #1, 2, or 3, but it's usually in the bottom 10. It's not a buying criteria. It's nice. It's a luxury. Some people really want it, but not to the extent that many of the other attributes matter. So it's not just about sales. It's very much about operations, meeting the criteria, measuring the criteria, and then feeding it to sales. And the other thing I will tell you about sales, salespeople have been singing from the same hymnal for a long time. Try to get them to change their song. It's hard. So we've also, you know, we've come up with a way to reinforce using the competitive advantage statements and training salespeople how to use it, because they don't want to change. It's like, I've been moderately successful or somewhat successful doing what I'm doing. So, you know, forget about this stuff. Usually there's 1 or 2 early adapters who will use the competitive advantages, their sales close rate goes up, and then they get everybody else on board.
Interesting. I wrote a piece talking about, you know, how share of voice should really be share of ear, right? You know, who's listening to the customer and in what way are they listening to the customer? And I think some of those good salespeople are doing that, right? So, you know, clearly part of your process is about making sure that you listen to, you know, actual unmet needs and actual wants and values from the customer. Do you think companies spend enough time doing that?
Listening?
Mm-hmm.
No. I know that because of the statistic that's in my book. And when we go back to a company, we've completed the research, and so we go, okay, here's the research. We've tested 20 buying attributes, but before we tell you what the top 3 buying criteria are, we want all of you folks, salespeople included, to vote. What do you think came in 1, 2, or 3? We do it every time. We've done it to over 350 companies and sales teams. As you may recall from the book, 90% get it wrong. 90% of businesses do not know their customers' top buying criteria, which is why I can blatantly say, no, they're not listening. Yeah. But to be fair, #1 is salespeople are on the front line. They're always being negotiated with. So because they're being negotiated with, they're hearing price, price, price. Well, I've been able through research to prove it's not price, but they're on the front line and they're hearing that. So to be fair to them, they are hearing that. And also there's an art and a science to research. There's a way to ask the questions. When it's double blind, you remove the bias, which is why we like that so much. And when a salesperson's asking, you know, salespeople, I know salespeople, they like to talk. They like less to listen. Some do a good job of it, but they're also they're listening, they're thinking about what they're going to say next. And they're not asking in a structured way, and or recording results. Like 90% of the sale of my prospects I listened to this week said this. There's just sort of off the cuff.
Yeah, and I guess they're not giving them room to, offer up things that the product doesn't do. So, and I know in your book you cover this idea of price-based competition, and when price becomes an issue. I mean, I'm in an industry that this is a huge deal. The cost of new medicines, especially, is always being, touted as one of the problems of uptake in our space. I mean, my belief is that no one minds a high price if the product's worth it, right? But the problem is we've got high price products that can't prove that they're worth it. So you talk about finding the competitive advantage over maybe generic competition, over other competitors. But if you're being judged on price, you're already in the wrong place. Is that a reasonable summary of
Yeah,
of
absolutely. If you're in price, you have not built a value proposition. A value proposition is that which is relevant, measurable, and relative to their alternative choices. And so if you're not measuring it and you don't know what's relevant, then you don't have a value proposition, and therefore price becomes your tiebreaker. I love telling this story when I do some presentations. I tell them this story. Have you ever been to Orlando, to Disney? Take your family, rent a car, you bring in the car back into the airport after Disney, and you got a gas station on the right. Now I'm going to talk in US dollars, and I'm going to talk about rates before Biden, meaning when it was lower, there was a gas station on the right, which was $5.95 a gallon. Across the street was $2.95 a gallon. But you had a 2-mile median to go through to down and around to get to the cheaper gas. So what do? I ask groups, what do you do? I say you can give it to Hertz for $14.95 a gallon, or you can pay $5.95. Everybody says they pay $5.95. I said, what did we just pay for? We paid for time and convenience. Your customers will pay for time and convenience if you show them how you've saved them time and made it more convenient. I have a talk I'm getting ready to do down in Hollywood, Florida pretty soon, and it's called Don't Take for Granted That Which is Taken for Granted. Because there's so many things that businesses do for their customers that you let customers take for granted. And that example I gave you about that copy, first time fix, don't let customers take that for granted. If you're getting out there and fixing it, you got to be in their face about the result. So you can move away from price when you don't let them take for granted everything you're doing.
Yeah, I once asked at a conference how many people had flown internationally to this conference, and most hands went up. And then I said, how many of you flew business class versus economy? And a lot of hands stayed up. And I said, well, could you tell me the value of a business class seat to you? And some people can't answer the question, but there's a lot of shifting uncomfortably in their seat. And I said, you all know the price difference, but what's the value difference? And so it's a better night's sleep. I could work on the plane. I said, is that really worth that to your company? And there's this sort of sense that actually, no, it isn't just about price. There's a value to this, and some of it might be intangible. Some of it might not be voiced, right? That rationally, does it make sense? No, but to the emotions, to the kind of individual, absolutely. And someone else is paying, great. We're definitely going to do this. Would you make that same choice on your own? No, that would have flown the economy to get there. So I always find people struggle with that difference between price and value unless they're at that cutting edge.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting way of positioning it. Yeah, I always say there's a little formula we use, which is the value is the benefit times the relevance of the deliverable. So if order accuracy, if I don't care what else you do but get my order right, that's my number one relevant thing, and you can show me that you've got a 98%, less than 2% order error rate, then you've built confidence. And our other mantra is build confidence, reduce risk, minimize price as an issue. And you can do that if you've got good metrics proving past performance that you've been able to do these things. That's another one of the attributes of the criteria is you must state these competitive advantages in the past tense. In business, past performance is the best indicator of future performance, unlike a mutual fund, past performance. So don't tell me you will deliver on time, tell me you have delivered at 98.6% on time for the past 6 months. That's past performance. And most businesses fail to do that. Even when we do the workshop, we have to crack the whip because they want to go back to present tense. And we say, no, 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 what have you done?
I like that. I like that. And as you move into this other thing that's a really bugbear of mine, that people kind of do their annual SWOT, because they have to. They're going to do their strengths and weaknesses, and someone's making them do it, and so they half-ass that, and then they kind of turn those strengths into, this is our competitive advantage, and typically it's internal looking. But I love that, that whole chapter that you had about pulling this apart. The strengths are not advantages unless you do something with them.
They're just givens. If you don't have good quality, good customer service, good people who are knowledgeable, consistent, responsive, innovative, and trust our relationship, I mean, that's what everybody spews. If you don't have that, you're not going to make it to the final beauty contest, right? You're not going to be one of the last contenders that I'm even interviewing for the work. So it's really hard getting businesses off of their rote speeches. But we love when we go into a company and do this, because the lights go on. I mean, it's just amazing. We just did one up in Chicago, and they were all kind of engineers, and we're like, oh no, not an engineer group, it's pushing a rock uphill, they're so left brain. But they were all over it. They loved it. They got so far into it. It doesn't always work that way, but most of the time the team is excited to have something to say. Oh, that company was an ESOP, all the more reason why they were very attentive. But it's good stuff. It's not hard. It's a little rigorous. It doesn't take that long. In 6 months, you can change the nature of your business.
Yeah, I find the same, that some of those R&D folks are often more creative because they've got more bandwidth, right? The what if is easier when you've got a lot of substrate to work with. I think the folks that often struggle are the kind of marketing folks who they've learned one thing to be true about cancer or Parkinson's, and they're going to hit it over and over until it doesn't work anymore. But I want to segue into clearly I love your chapter on competitive positioning, and the fact that your advantage may not be that it may not be an advantage, but it may be a competitive advantage if you just position it that way. Could you elaborate a little bit on
so one of my favorite ones, and I don't remember if this is in the book, but it was an interior design company. I think it may be. And so one of their statements that came out of their work was, we have AutoCAD capability, which saves you 14 days in project scheduling and allows for same-day changes. So I was showing that to a group, and there was an interior design group, and they said, well, everybody has that. I said, yeah, but do you say it? Do you say it? Not, do you say that you have AutoCAD, or do you say that you have AutoCAD that saves 14 days in project scheduling and allows for same-day changes? Well, no. Well, that's what I call competitive positioning. You say it if nobody else is, and for a time at least. It's actually more than for a time, because in my experience with our clients, they say, oh, well, if we say this, our competitors are going to say it. So we proceed to check their websites, and people don't pick up on it. They may notice it, but they don't really mimic it. So it's a good thing to get those kind of statements out. So to your point, I always ask companies, what is something that everybody in your industry does, but nobody's talking about because they're taking it for granted? Now, safety in some companies is a really big one. There's so many ways you can describe safety besides the usual blah, blah, blah about it. And we've found that in a lot of companies because they take for granted everything they've done in that space.
Interesting. And sometimes those words, right, that people will use words as if everyone understands them. So when it comes to safety, you got people that deeply understand it. And they assume that everyone knows everything about their product, and they've read all the data sheets and they know everything. Some of the challenges in simplicity, right? Simplifying this kind of complex set of things that someone might want. So they love the feature list, but getting to the one thing is always really hard. Did you find the same?
Yeah, I spend a good deal of time telling them not to assume anything. Don't use acronyms that you use in your industry that the prospect or the customer may not know. I often will use this story. In the US, if you go to a football game, I don't know if you've ever been to a basketball game in the US. I had not been. When I moved back to Miami, I was invited to a basketball game downtown Miami Heat. And I didn't go football games. Basketball games. I didn't know anything about it, but I went with a friend. I had nothing else to do. We go in, we get seated, and I look at her. I said, Mary, I thought you said your boyfriend had really good seats. Why are we sitting on these folding chairs on the floor under the net? Well, if you've ever been, you know those are the $5,000 seats. She assumed I knew. I was like, these are awful seats. Why are we sitting in these folding chairs? I tell that in a lot of my keynotes, and people, they go, oh my God. I said, yeah, it's really stupid. But my point is, it's perspective. And you've got to understand not everybody has your perspective, and certainly not your customers and prospects all the time.
And maybe something that's not in the book, but I'd love to, I deal with positioning every day, but I think it's such a terrible word for this process of trying to figure out what the point of a drug might be, or what the point of a product might be. Do you think people will give positioning the credit that it is due in the business world?
I don't think they understand what it means. That along with branding, positioning, I think it's a gray word for most. They go out and hire companies to do this, but they're not really sure. At least in my experience from the mid-market companies I've worked with, oh, we just hired a branding company. I go, well, show me what they did. And it's like, well, we got a new logo in a new look. And that's actually one of my pet peeves, because a lot of branding companies go into a company and they'll interview everybody. Who are you? What are you? I say, well, it doesn't matter who they are. It matters what the customer wants them to be. And that's who you build. That's how you build. You don't build on what our personality is, loving and caring and, all this stuff. It's a soft words. You may be, and that may be a plus at the end of the day. But if you're going to be branded, we try to get our clients to brand based on their number one or two buying criteria, competitive advantages.
Interesting. And I think what you mean by that is, I think, is the same thing I mean by that, which is getting to know what your customers really think, right? What motivates them when they're making decisions, what doesn't motivate them, because there's this kind of politically correct view that positioning should be emotional, it should be aspirational, it should be positive. But of course, a lot of certainly prescribing decisions are not positive, right? There's things that they won't tell the patient, there's things they won't tell you as a company. Do you think there's a big risk of that kind of, everyone's happy, but no one really gets to what the customers really think?
Say that again. What was the question?
Yeah, so I guess the question is, are we getting to what customers really think, or are we getting to what they say they think when it comes to your product?
Yeah, so that's why we like double-blind research. We can remove some of the bias. I'm just thinking, because I was asked to do a keynote by a very large international pharmaceutical company. I didn't do it. It didn't work out. Didn't have the date. I already booked something else. But we're working with a CRO right now in ophthalmology. And as coincidence would have it, one of my good friends and past clients has a product with this very CRO at the time. And so he started telling me about the product that the big company had. And it's ophthalmology. I'll make a long story short. What they didn't tell about it is, if you use that drug, you need injections in the eye once a month. Nobody gets to know that. He said, Jaynie, I'm so glad you didn't take that, because they were going to have you try to position their one product against their other product, and they're really bad. They're bad to try to position. Not saying the drug may work, but you try to tell somebody you need a shot in the eye once a month. Not good.
Yeah. And I think sometimes they just go past the fact that their customers know this, right? So there's almost like self-serving research leads to self-serving positioning, leads to self-serving kind of campaigns.
Well, yeah, the doctor in that case would be happy to have the patient back once a month. The patient doesn't want to come back and have that. So that was the point he made. Which level of customer are you marketing to?
Yeah, and you talk about this as almost the dangerous disparity of, so believing
Yes.
your own hype while while the customer's thinking something different, and so you're never going to cross that divide. I kind of like that
Yeah.
description.
And when we have customers that have multiple levels of customer, we encourage them to do each level. In other words, if you're selling to a distributor who's selling to a contractor, you need to see what both of them care about, because it's a different pitch altogether.
Yeah, and across industries, do you see this thing where you take what you think is the greatest competitive advantage of your organization, and the customer's sitting there not caring about it, and they just keep wanting to hit the same thing over and over again?
You mean, do companies keep shouting from the rooftop that which nobody cares about?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, we see it all the time. And,
yeah.
and it's really kind of heartbreaking. We had one company up in Massachusetts, I think it was, who had just finished with a branding company. And I forget what they had all over the company. And I can't, forgive me, I can't remember exactly what it was. It might have been something about like the experience of our people. Whatever it was, when we finished the research, whatever they were just branded as, it wasn't at the top of the list. So it's very often you have to be careful of the warm and fuzzy stuff, and particularly in an industry like you're in, that's not going to cut it. You really need the facts.
Yeah, and understanding their day jobs and their real motivations, as you say. I mean, some people, sometimes it is as basic as physicians getting paid more to do one procedure than a different procedure, and well, yeah, that's their real world. So,
Conflict of
if
interest.
ignore it,
Yeah.
ignore it or lean into it. Yeah, I always find. I'm going to ask you this off book question as well. Do you think the ad agencies get this, or
No, forgive me. I don't know who's going to watch this podcast, but I was speaking to a group and there was an ad agency in the group, and I will never forget what that CEO of that ad agency said to me. They kind of went around the room afterwards and said, what's your takeaway? And his takeaway was, heal thyself first, meaning he wasn't even doing this right for his own company, let alone for his clients. So those that will, grasp it, no, they're not doing it well. Some have moved into this way of doing things. But I mean, all you have to do is look at ads, listen to TV ads, radio ads, and you sit there and you shake your head. They're like, really, some big ad agency got paid big bucks for this? I mean, I say that all day long when I see this stuff, but
yeah.
if it sells, I don't know. I don't know the results.
Yeah, I watch car ads all day long and kind of wonder, they all end up in the same place. It's all
Yes.
freedom and
Oh, yeah.
just
Trying to
incredible.
sell sex appeal in the car, it's
Yeah,
like, really?
yeah, and actually, pharmaceuticals are going into this sort of dangerous world of DTC, where direct to consumer advertising, where everyone has a golden retriever and a beach, and the claims are all the same. So everyone gets there. But one of the things that's hard is to come back to how do companies understand their competitive advantage as a company, and then the product competitive advantages. Do you find that companies are well set up to do product versus company?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because we get asked that whenever we go in. What are we going to focus on? We say, well, let's do both. Let's see what we can say about the company, and let's see what we can say about the product. But I really discourage them from being product focused unless it's very innovative, because it's a commodity. There is very few products or services that are not commoditized. Very few. In pharmaceuticals, if they came up with some fancy big brand new cure, then that's different. But for the most part, everything tends to be very commoditized. So I always say, it's not what you sell, it's the how. Do you sell on time? Do you sell accuracy? Do you sell with good documentation? It's the how that's going to differentiate you, not the product or the service.
Yeah. And then finally, you talked about, that you might need to create a competitive advantage if you don't have one. That this is, I'll say this is where we kind of, both you and I think, differ from the recent book on positioning, which is, it's not about the product, and go, well, it kind of is. Positioning could sometimes be about developing better products for the customers with this insight. So, as you say, if you don't have one, build one, create one. Could you give some examples of things you've seen?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I should footnote what I was saying about that. I mean, certainly you've got Apple products. Nobody said, build those. Those are definitely product focused. There's no question. I think because I deal so much with mid-market and it's manufacturing and it's services that you see all day long, every day. So I deal with so many that are commoditized. And even eventually those innovative products, they have a window where it's about the product. And then, as you know, they're copied or duplicated in some way. But they're very few that really can do that. Pharmaceuticals perhaps can. I don't know a whole lot about that.
Mm.
And again, I don't know that much about the patents, how long they last or anything like that.
Yeah, but that idea of, I mean, in your world of being able to change the product so that, you say you're collecting a bunch of stuff on metrics on this is the dimension to be better at. Do you find companies receptive to that kind of input?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we get pushback from some who feel like it's onerous, and they're, got a thin staff, and they say, oh, we've got too much going on, we can't do it right now. But most of them will do it because they see the value. They completely get, I need to do this because, my customers are telling me on-time delivery and order accuracy is most important, and I don't measure those. We have one in the UK. I love this one. This guy was real personable. He sold to retailers and then to wholesalers. We went over, and order accuracy was like the #2 attribute. So the CEO, real bubbly guy, goes, oh, that's great. We measure order accuracy. And his COO leaned over and said, boss, we haven't measured it in 4 years. He didn't even know they weren't measuring it. So he said, let's have a look. Well, it was in the 60s. I said, the #2 thing your customers want, both levels, wholesalers and retailers, you don't measure, you didn't even know you weren't measuring when they're in the 60s. 6 months later, it was in the 90s. Now it's all over his website. 5 years later, he's still talking about it.
Yeah. What would be your speculation as to why that happens in companies? Why do they lose sight of the thing that matters most to their customers?
Because the top brass is putting out fires. They're reactive instead of proactive, and they're not looking at the stuff every day that they should be. And that's what we like about this process. When we do the research, it shines a light on. We say, look, you don't need to measure everything, but you need to measure these 3 things, these 4 things. It's amazing. Then my second book, Relevant Selling, I don't know if you read that one, this story about Mila, which is a UK company. I love that story. Surgical glove company. When that company was purchased by a Scandinavian conglomerate, Mölnlycke, which bought all kinds of surgical supply companies, and that Biogel was in the UK. And they called us up. Their salesperson in the US read my book, said, come over and help us because we got a problem. So we get over there to the UK, and they say, well, here's the deal. The National Health Association in the UK wants procurement managers to buy on price. We're selling at a 40% premium, and we've lost 40% market share. I said, where's the next plane home? What am I doing here? So we went through our entire process I just described, and they had so many competitive advantages. They had so many only statements. We're the only company that air tests all our gloves. If you're a surgeon and you get a hole in your glove in the middle of surgery, how quickly do you want to know? Right now. They were the only company that had patented technology that could do that. We had a list a mile long of things that they were taken for granted. And then they said, oh, this is so great. Will you deliver it to the sales team? We're going to have that over in Penang, Malaysia. I'm like, oh yeah, just when I want to go to Penang, I need another big airplane ride. So we go to Penang, and we've got the sales force who was originally completely beat up because they selling at a premium. People are buying on price and lost all this market share. So we laid this out in a grid. We said, here's you. And because it was healthcare in the UK, we had good comparisons to their top competitors. They hands down were absolutely beating in the marketplace. We put it down in front of them. We asked them to look at it, and we said, okay, somebody give a reaction. I thought, I'm waiting to see, what do they think? Long pregnant pause. I said, come on, somebody. And some lady looks up, she goes, it's brilliant. And I said, somebody else, fantastic, in their British accents. I said, oh, thank God. I said, what do you think? They said, we can sell with this. We don't have to worry about price now. And that was the value proposition right in front of them that they had left untouched.
Yeah, interesting. No, I recognize everything that you're saying when the sales reps come back and say we're too expensive, and
Yeah.
that tends to infect things. And then and apologies for focusing on the competitive advantage book, but the kind of last piece about the communication. We meet so many clients that feel like they told people something because they went to a conference once and showed them a graph, and and they should know because your point is about the kind of persistence of communication, I think.
Yes, we say communicate your competitive advantages ad nauseum, again and again, and consistent. And here's one you probably confront is consistently make sure your website says what your sales materials say, what your marketing material says, what people are saying come out of their mouth, same message. When we audit that, it's like they're all different. So if you internally don't have agreement what your competitive advantage or your message is, how can the marketplace know?
Yeah, and just experienced a perfect example of that as someone unpacked a company I know but don't advise, unpacked their website in front of them. Said, right, this is the journey a user might take through your website, and you're saying this thing, and you're saying this thing, you're saying this other thing on the 3 clicks that I've just taken, and everyone was horrified at that. And it's interesting how seldom they would have even thought to review that journey themselves.
Yeah, we see that too. And we also see where the numbers don't match. So, it's 98% on time delivery on one page, it's 92% on another page because they didn't update that one. And then some of our clients, we go back and we continue to check their websites and we go, okay, it's been 2 years and you still have the same number. Nobody believes that. It's like, you got to update the metrics. You can't just throw a number up and you're done. And so we like our clients to use bar graphs. They update them monthly so people can see you're actually still measuring this. But when people know you're measuring something, you can build confidence and reduce risk. They know you're on top of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially these days when it feels like that's an easy loop to keep closed. Jaynie, I clearly could talk to you about positioning and competitive advantage for a long time, but I'm coming up to the end of the time that we booked. How can people find you? Where would you suggest they start, and what's the easiest way to find you?
So our website is smart, S-M-A-R-T, advantage, all one word, smartadvantage.com. You can contact us through there. There's a contact page in there. And unfortunately, our phone system was just hacked. So we changed our phone number, and now the phone number up there, it works, it'll get through to us, but it's not our normal phone system.
Sorry to hear that.
Both books, by the way, I don't know if you have Relevant Selling. The second book has that Mila story in it I just told. Some really good UK companies are in there in that book because we did a lot of it when I was writing that book at the time.
Nice. So. Actually, a question I'll throw in right at the end. Are there any books that you would recommend? Any that you've been particularly excited by?
I hate that question. Everybody is really big on Traction. That's been around a while, but I think that kind of is also a good book if you're running a company. It's, I think, one of the ones that most of the people I know are reading now. Amazing. Still, not now, still. It's been around.
Yeah. Well, there's some books that persist for a long time.
Yeah.
Fortunately and unfortunately, but it's certainly a rich field. Jaynie, thank you so much. I can talk about positioning all night long, but I'll have to let you go. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
That's it for this week's episode of Idea Collider. To continue the conversation, visit our website at ideapharma.com. Follow us in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcast. Until next time, I'm Mike Rea, wishing you great success.